All right, with another episode of the Conveyor Podcast. I'm your host, Quinn Lawson. Today, coming from with a guest, Jeff Wallace, coming in from Oakland, California. Jeff is a serial entrepreneur turned founder of two startup accelerators. One is predominantly focused on domestic U.S. startups, and the other one is focused on international startups. Jeff's focus and specialty is in investor readiness. What more important communication opportunity than the first impression between a pitching founder and a startup investor? So I'm sure we will go into great length about that important process, developing the communications, making sure that you have a great experience establishing the founder-investor relationship. Jeff specializes in getting his startups in front of investors, and then further to that, making sure the investor, the entrepreneurs he's supporting are ready to have a compelling story that fits that particular investor, and then honestly and accurately marketing the state of the business behind those pitches through a system he calls his 9 vital signs of startup success. So Jeff, welcome to the Conveyor Podcast. Nice to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Quinn. Thank you for having me. I'm always excited to talk about these topics, especially with people who also share the passion for this ecosystem of startups and innovation like you do.
So let's jump right into it. As a experienced startup accelerator founder, how do you manage first impressions when a new founder comes to you?
The first impressions, me to them or them to me? Just to be clear.
Them to you.
Them to me. So listen, we jump into, we have an application window. We have a ton of founders applying to participate in our programs, and it's always a matter of their engagement, right? 99% of these interactions are on Zoom or Google Meet or some kind of video conference, and so that it already creates its own set of interesting challenges. You're not sitting across a table looking someone straight in the eye, in real life. But founders who can engage and really articulate a problem and a passion about solving that problem, definitely that's a major piece of it, right? Just that first impression we get from them, if they really step into that discussion and demonstrate a passion for a problem they experience or recognize is out there, if it's not a personal problem they're experiencing, and just have a huge passion and an energy around solving it. And secondarily, I think, but equally important, having a team around them. I don't think any entrepreneurs really, it's going to require a team effort. There's never an individual who's going to solve it all. So we want to make sure they have a proper team, or at least an understanding of a necessity for a proper team around them.
I find it so interesting that venture and the last 10 years, a lot of things are about automation and abstraction. And the funny thing is that venture, investors are investing into startups that do automation, incorporate more data, but when they do their job of interacting and creating relationships with potential opportunities through founders, it's still so human. It is absolutely so human. And I have a great example. I have a friend who ran an accelerator, and she quantitatively evaluated her process of managing first impressions with founders, and she found that in the early afternoon that she had a lower rating for pitches she was receiving because it was after lunch or just her circadian rhythm or something like that. So what do you think about that?
That's really interesting. I think it is good to know when you operate best, right? And if you're better in the morning, then take those calls in the morning, when your energy level may be higher. I can imagine after lunch, you have that lull in energy maybe. And so maybe she was, demonstrating or reflecting a lower energy just because of, like you said, a circadian rhythm, or she had a full belly having had lunch and just was a little bit in a different energy mode. So yeah, I think it's really important for not only for the founders to reflect well in their first impressions to us, but I think it's equally important for us to reflect well to them. They're applying to participate in a program with us, right? They have many other options they can choose, and we have to reflect something that is going to make them feel like this is a great group. I want to be part of this team and be part of this community. So yeah, I think that's an interesting observation, and I love the way that you went about doing that, actually, to assess that.
Yeah, going that far to be a little quantitative and
absolutely
developing your self-awareness around these relationships. And I think I think it shows a very principled approach to doing your job with a high degree of ethical operating.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even in our programs, we do, every time we have mentoring sessions or presentations, every discussion ends with a QR code and a form, to a quick feedback form. How are we doing? It's almost like an NPS, a net promoter score. We just have to ask a couple quick questions. We assess all of our mentors, and we hold ourselves as mentors within our own program equal to the other mentors in our programs. Even though we're the founders of the program overall, we hold ourselves to a minimum of a 4.5 out of 5 rating. If we or any other mentor falls below that, there's going to be a conversation had, and it may not continue, because our goal is to provide value to our founders. If our founders are assessing any of our mentors, and again, ourselves included, below a 4.5 out of a 5, we feel as though we're not doing our job in delivering perceived or real value to the founders, both of which are important. If the founders don't feel like you're delivering value, even if you think you are, that's important to us. So we also do a lot of quantitative assessing and tracking that. We're very blessed to have a huge network of amazing mentors. We've got about 40 to 50 very active mentors in our programs, and we currently average around a 4.9 on our sessions. So that to us is a critical thing. If we see that falling off, that's an indicator we're not doing our job as well as we should be.
That's a super lagging indicator around how you are managing the interaction with founders. And I know that, historically, or it's a relatively new concept, that VCs and venture investors are in service to founders. Founders' times are, their schedules are packed. They have to execute at a very high clip. And so I think it was, anecdotally, I remember hearing it was Ben Horowitz, who was like, you have to pay if you're late for a meeting with a founder. And I don't know if that's just indicative of the competition with venture investing or something,
yeah.
But it kind of flipped on its head, investing in venture being in service to the founder, which is a good.
I love that transition. I actually was in the early stages of that transition when a VC I knew reached out to me and asked about hiring someone to help market their services to founders. And that was a huge shift from, I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but it's almost like the fat cat with the money was just sitting back and everyone was knocking on their door saying, give me money, right? The founders would come to them, chasing them, saying, I need money, you have money, help me out. But it did flip where the investors realized we're in competition now with every other investor. We need to go market ourselves and sell ourselves as why are we the better investor choice for you as a founder. So I think it's a good flip, actually, that is the way it is. I think founders, I tell every founder in our programs, you should do as much due diligence on the investors as they're going to do on you as an investment opportunity for them. You should do equal amount of due diligence on them and make sure they're the right investors, because they're going to be part of your journey from here forward. This is not a temporary moment, right? They're in now. They're part of the community that you are now creating in your investment opportunity. So it's really interesting. And I think it's a very positive thing, actually.
It blows my mind how fast people move when it comes to establishing relationships that are literally genetically locked into the organization you are building. Equity ownership for money is extremely expensive and
absolutely
if you get it wrong, right?
Oh my gosh, getting rid of an investor that you don't end up clicking with is incredibly difficult, challenging. It's going to probably have some legal aspect to it. It's an emotional thing. Yesterday, in fact, I was running late. I had to get a document notarized, and I had a meeting with a founder who I've known for years, and I've been involved as an investor in this business. And I texted him, and I said, hey, I might be running a few minutes late in an hour when we're supposed to meet, because I've got to go get some things notarized, and I just don't know how long it'll take. And I got back finally about 2 minutes after the hour, and we get on the call, and I texted him right away. I said, hey, I'm back now. Let's jump on. And he said, you must be one of the most respectful people I know, investors I know here in Silicon Valley. He goes, the fact that you took an opportunity an hour ago to tell me you may be a few minutes late, he goes, most people would just have me sitting here waiting. And I said, I don't get it. Time is the most important thing any one of us can give to another, because time is our absolutely most limited resource, each of us, right? There is only a limited time we're going to have. We don't know how long that is. And so if you're giving up time to a founder or to an investor, just be respectful of their time, right? I think it's a really important aspect. And so to me, I think it goes back to, I feel in service to the founders when I'm working with them. They're giving me their time. They're giving me their confidence that I'm worthy of them spending that time with, because they have a million things to do. There's no founder that's, unsure of what to spend their time on. They have a billion things going on. So I just think it's a good thing to have that service ethic when you are working with founders, whether you're an investor, a service provider, partner, whatever. Just treat people with that respect. I think it's a good way to be.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And using things like being busy or using a perceived power dynamic that you may or may not have.
Exactly.
Is absolutely the wrong way to go about business. And also this sort of idea, I always think of, it's most acute in online dating, the perceived optionality of infinite options creates this discarding around arm's length or acquaintance relationships that is kind of making culture suffer a little bit. And so it's really easy. Yeah. It's really easy to be professional, do what used to be the norm around treating people like neighbors effectively. Makes you stand out, I think.
It's funny because when he made that comment to me yesterday, I thought, like, of course I'm going to tell you if I'm going to be late to a meeting. Like, it didn't even think in my head. I couldn't even process, like, why would I not tell you if I'm going to be late to a call? Like I would, it's a little bit of the golden rule, right? If someone's going to be late for a call with me, I'd prefer them tell me that. So I'm not wasting my time. I can use the extra 5 minutes. If you're going to be late, I'll do something, at least not be sitting on a line, alone waiting for you to show up. So it is interesting. It's a little bit of a golden rule element. And I just feel like I would want someone to be respectful of my time. So I don't think it's fair to expect someone to do something for you if you're not willing to do it for them.
That's a really good illustration of sort of the one-to-one relationship, because also another thing too is you never know where you necessarily stand in that professional relationship, and you introduce by being late imaginary scenarios or things that, and it's important in internal company communications too. If you are perpetually late when you're the manager or the leader, then you are establishing this norm of kind of slacking off, or
it's a permission, right? You're permitting that, you're creating that permission to be late by showing it you're doing it.
Yeah.
Every one of my presentations, when I do speaking or just presenting, even in a workshop or something, the last slide of every one of my presentations has the words on that last slide: "Thank you for the privilege of your time." That's just it. And it's just been in my head for years that time is the thing we are all limited on. And I appreciate when someone's willing to spend their time with me. Like, they have lots of options where they can spend their time. If they're spending it with me, I do want to acknowledge it. And that is my subtle way of acknowledging it. On the end of any one of my presentations, my last slide has a little feedback QR code. How did we do today? And thank you for the privilege of your time. That's just my standard ending of any kind of interaction like that, a speaking thing or a workshop or something of that sort.
So let's talk about time as it relates to communications in business. So you're in the Valley, you're in Oakland. I'm in Toronto, and there's this perceived cultural bias, I would say, towards the Valley. As proud as I am of the Canadian venture scene, startup scene, a lot of amazing things happening here, I'd say that the speed of trust, borrowing from that term, is a little bit slower than it is in the Valley. The US, it might be a US Canadian cultural difference, but what happens, and let's also paint a picture around. So what I want to learn about is sort of in high fast venture development scenarios, really hot startup growing, needs venture money, needs to grow a team. How do you coach your startups who are raising funding to develop trust, or with either let's say investors, but it could even be like key hires and things like that too.
Yeah, it's a great question. Years ago when I was in consulting, I worked on what was called the quick hits team, which was when we would get hired, we would want to quickly develop something that provided a demonstrable value to the client, because we charged high rates, wanted to justify our rates. So we had this little effort called quick hits. It was always go in and find some low-hanging fruit, if you will, that will demonstrate that we can identify value and bring it, realize that value quickly. And I looked at that as I need to work with these new client team members, right? I'm stepping into their environment as the consultant or part of a consulting team, and I have to have trust quickly. I don't have time to earn your trust, right? You just have to trust me and let's go for it, right? Let's try. And so I had this attitude of trust must be unearned. And it flipped the script on the earning trust over time, which takes time, obviously. And it just said, I'm going to give you trust. And yes, I realize the risk of you could take advantage of me giving you that trust without having earned it, so to say, over time. But it allows us to act in trusted ways faster. And so to me, it is part of the same culture of Silicon Valley, where you could get into a relationship. Time is, again, always the one thing people, it's not a friend of a startup, right? You've got to work quickly and be efficient and effective. And so for me, the thing I tell every founder is just be authentic. If you're experiencing challenges, discuss them authentically. Don't try and BS and paper over challenges you're experiencing. Talk to your investors, talk to your partners, tell prospective employees, here's the situation. When I hire people into my businesses, I always tell people, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on in our business and what our needs are. I don't know you, the applicant, as well as you know you. So I'm going to ask you, if you like what you hear and you decide to join, the first thing you're going to have as a responsibility is to actually write your job description. For two reasons I do that. One is, I don't know you as well as you do. I've laid out everything as authentically as I can. I now need you to tell me how you're going to help me address it, whatever the issue might be. And the second thing I always use, it's a little bit of a joke, but not really, is don't come to me and complain about your job. You wrote your job description. I didn't. And it's a little funny, interaction I might have with people, but it's real. I want people to be able to spell out their own ability and their own way of helping me address the challenges that we have. But that requires an openness and a vulnerability on my part to be that open and vulnerable about sharing problems and challenges that the company is experiencing or I'm having in my role. And I tell founders, do exactly that. And I've had founders say to me, oh, well, we think the market size is X billions of dollars. And I say, but I don't think it really is. Why do you say it is? I think your sliver is much smaller than that. And they'll say, yeah, but we know investors like billion-dollar plus markets or multi-billion-dollar markets. And I said, well, they do. They like big markets, but they really like honest, authentic founders, much more so than they like numbers that seem like they're, in the billions, but may not be accurately reflecting what you're tackling. So just be authentic. Don't try and paper over things. They'll smell through that in a heartbeat. And so that's my, communication guidance is just be honest, be open, be authentic, and allow yourself to be vulnerable. Vulnerability, I think, is a positive quality. If you're willing to be vulnerable, I think that's a positive quality for founders. So you don't have to try and be overly confident, chest puffed out, talking about how great things are and how big the market is. Just be authentic. I really think that resonates much better with people.
Are there any so beginning with trust and honesty versus earning the trust? I can see how that allows you to stay fast and agile, move efficiently. I think for people learning who might make mistakes along the way, there might be some practical. You've been doing this for quite a long time, so I'm assuming sometimes when that's the case, you might know what the protections you have in order to. So are there any practical trust is there anything that you would recommend if you operate with that policy that you have to protect yourself? So things like, I don't know, NDA, vesting cliffs, things like that, or am I even sort of still thinking about this earning trust thing the wrong way?
Here's what I would say to that. I have been burned by founders that I've given trust to and offered my, wanted them to be trusting in me. So I do expose myself to risk of being burned by people who have a malintent, so to say. I'm willing to take that risk personally because I feel like in the grand scheme, the amount of times I'm going to get burned versus the amount of times I'm going to move much more effectively and efficiently with the other larger number of founders is always going to be in my favor. Yes, I'll get burned occasionally, but those burns aren't going to be as negative as all of the positives from the approach that I use. So I have been burned. There's no question. I don't try to mask that at all. I don't say this is a flawless strategy. But for me personally, I feel like the amount of times I can move faster and more effective outweighs the few times I have been burned. And I have been. And those sting, by the way, because here I am giving trust to somebody and expecting that to be given back to me. And on a couple of occasions, one or two in over a decade, though, versus literally I've worked with we were just touching over 3,700 founders I've kind of involved in our programs in the last decade. Now, we haven't worked personally with every single one of them. Some of that could be group, but I've worked personally with hundreds and hundreds of founders, and I can count 2 times in my recollection that I've been burned. So I'll take those odds in my favor all the time, even though, yes, it does expose you to some risk of people with bad intentions, right? Who are looking for something not acting in a trustful way.
So the way I would summarize that is operate with being candid, trusting, start with, assuming the Steelman argument, assume the very best in everyone that you're working with. And the speed that affords you, plus the continued speed when you do, have a setback, as long as you aren't basically hurt and slowed down, you have to be prepared to take that hit and keep the momentum forward. Essentially, that's I think actually a really nuanced approach to that, because take that sort of humanity internally, but do not either become jaded or close-minded, and just have faith that your forward momentum in your vision on the work that you're doing, the speed at which you develop more relationships in your network will be additive versus sort of the exposure you get from some negative outcomes from that mindset. That's wonderful.
Yeah. I think it's a good summation of it. And the one thing I would say is never take one founder's who burns you. Don't allow that to jade you with any other founder. Everyone's an individual who makes their own choices, right? Each one are compartmentalized. One founder being distrustful doesn't mean the next founder is going to be distrustful. Don't distrust one founder because you just got burned by another. They're different people. They operate differently. Yes, there will be occasional people who are that way, and that's just human nature, unfortunately. But yeah, with the number of positive experiences and relationships that I have been able to have based on my style versus the occasional being burned, yeah, the burns sting. I'm not going to lie. They definitely sting, but they are so infrequent, relatively speaking. The value of this approach for me has been much more in my favor and much more favorable to the relationships than the few negative situations that have happened.
So let's talk about another type of core communications related to early startup building, particularly investor relationships. What I find, what I'm experiencing right now in the market, from what I'm seeing, is that there's been this heuristic, this pattern of SaaS startups, sort of like SaaS startups being the sort of like a pattern of venture opportunity. There's like an established business model, and with the advent of AI, but even just a little bit of saturation in SaaS, the pattern matching and understanding where opportunities are seems to be a lot more complicated. Things have not formed when it comes to AI business models, but the alpha in startup opportunities are coming to these deep tech. So things like materials, blockchain, AI, like very R&D type of sectors. And quite often they now, compared to software, require a lot of capital up front, like much more capital up front. And so the way that I'm tying this into communications is the fact that people need to, it's, you know, the last convo was about establishing trust. So relationships, it doesn't matter what you're building, but now I want to focus on communicating what you are building when what you are building is complicated. So how do you recommend to your startups building complicated things align, share the vision, provide the right amount of understanding, and to building their following, building, you know, the required team to get to the next level?
Yeah, that is a hard one, Quinn. That is a hard one for, as I tell every founder, you know more about your business than any audience you're going to talk to. But what you have to realize is your knowledge and the way of communicating it in your own mind isn't going to be relatable. That's the word we always use, is compelling. What you communicate has to be compelling and relatable. And you have to target that or tailor that to your audience. If you're an engineer and you've built something very complex from an engineering perspective, for example, and you're talking to an audience of engineers, you can get into some of the acronyms, you can get into some of the complexities of what you've built, integrations, etc. But if you're talking to an audience of, and I don't mean anything dismissive, I count myself in this category, you know, a little bit older, later in life stage, angel investors who are successful and have money to invest in things, but don't come out of an engineering background necessarily, then you can't have that same conversation with that audience. You have to think, how do I communicate my complex innovation to a general audience, right? And the way we often recommend that is two things. One is oftentimes, where it's applicable, not always, but I'd say a high percentage of the time, using a persona, describing the person, and I'll just make up a name. Let's say we're going to talk about Maryanne. Maryanne is a woman experiencing these challenges. And then by the time you've described Maryanne and the challenges she's experiencing, your hope is that everyone in the audience is saying in their heads one of a couple things. Oh my gosh, I'm exactly like Maryanne. My spouse, my partner, my daughter, my cousin, my business partner, my friend, my neighbor is like Maryanne. You want them to associate a Maryanne of their own in their lives, because now you've made it relatable. And so all of a sudden they're thinking, you know what? I know people, or I am that person experiencing similar challenges. What are you going to tell me about that? You've got them on the edge of their seat waiting for the solution. Now you're going to introduce, here's how we solve Maryanne's challenges. If you speak in concepts, acronyms, statistics, you're going to lose a large portion of the audience, whoever the audience you're speaking with, unless, again, they're right in your field of study, your subject matter. So we recommend using personas, describing the challenges, and then introducing the solution in that way, because I will tell you, I had a founder in a bio kind of life science field, very complex thing. His problem slide before we were working with him were these 4 charts. It was like a quadrant type page with 4 different charts showing the ineffectiveness or the just the lack of credibility in the way cancer was being identified. Early detection of cancer. That's what his solution was about. And the 4 charts, I said to him, by the time you're done describing this to me, I kind of feel like you've given me cancer. Oh my God, this is painful to go through. There's got to be a better way to do this. And the after version, that's the before version. The after version was, I said to him, do you know anyone who passed from cancer? I lost my father to cancer. It's a very personal thing. My mom fought back cancer twice. This is a really personal topic for me. I wish they had identified these earlier. And he said, oh yeah, when I grew up, this was overseas, but he grew up in Europe, and he was a single child, and he had a cousin who lived nearby, and his cousin's name was Maryanne in my example. And he said Maryanne passed away from late stage detected stage 4 cancer. And so breast cancer. And so I said, do you mind if I change your problem slide? And he said, no. And I just did select all, delete. I said, do you have a photo of your cousin Maryanne? He says, yeah. And he was describing her. When he described her, he's like, we were like brothers and sisters. We were so close. She was my best friend growing up. We were really like, siblings, even though we were single kids, individual kids in each of our respective households. And then we just put a picture of Maryanne, and the heading became meet Maryanne. And he described how when we were kids, this was what our situation was. But unfortunately, she had breast cancer, and it was detected too late stage. It was stage 4, and she passed away. Had she been able to detect that earlier, she could be sitting on this, video conference with us or in this workshop with us. And that was the way he introduced it. Now, of course, who in an audience doesn't know someone who's been touched by cancer? Like I just mentioned, my father passed from it. My mom fought it back twice before she passed. It's a very personal topic for everybody. I think it's very relatable for everyone. So everyone started thinking, I have a relative, I have a family member, a friend, etc. Some people have had cancer themselves and fought it back, right? And so they can relate to it. And then he introduced his solution, which was targeting early detection of cancer through a very non-invasive process. And he went from couldn't get his story heard practically and nothing was coming financially to $2 million in fundraising very quickly because people related to it and had a Maryanne of their own who they thought, if this existed, it could help my Maryanne. And that's a way of communicating a very complex. It wasn't a simple thing that he had. It was complex, but it was a way to make it relatable and very compelling. And that's what we work with every founder on, is trying to find that same element of compelling and relevant and relatable, way of communicating your complex innovation.
There's so much to chew on related to that. And even your story talking about cancer makes what we're talking about more compelling, I think, too.
Yeah.
It's almost like you are, and so many people forget this. I find that there are lots of builders out there or folks who are so deep into their respective subject matter expertise, and then in a contradictory way, it makes them unreachable sometimes because to the average person that they're trying to have buy into the idea that they're sharing with them. I made this example with a client of mine where she's a lawyer and she sells a commoditized, law, accounting, wealth management, even investing. They're quote unquote, the service you're providing is slightly commoditized, like getting your taxes filed. It's a little bit commoditized. And so the way that you differentiate yourself is from the experience of providing that service. And so you have to, and so in the same way with startups, if funders in the most abstracted way, they want to deploy capital and get a return on investment. And so if you're just casting a really complicated, misunderstandable solution, and you don't really know why it's relatable, and you need to first know it's relatable in order for it to be compelling, and be like, I will buy into how you think this will play out, and I know you care about this because of your family member or this connection you have to it. And so that means that I see you in a more generous way, pivoting towards fixing this problem. Probably, you have to tap the lizard. You have to ping the lizard brain sometimes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you do. And it's interesting. I tell founders also very, very routinely, in a world of investors, let's say there was 1,000 investors, the likelihood is there's probably between 5 and maybe 10 that'll really care about what you're doing. There's not going to be 1,000. There's not going to be 900. There's not going to be 800. It's going to be probably about 10. So rather than what a lot of founders do, and I was this kind of founder myself early on, I've learned a lot of what not to do by doing it myself as a serial founder in my own journey. But what we counsel founders on now is don't spend the time having meeting after meeting with any investor who says, I'm an investor. Make sure that what you're offering fits with what they're looking for, right? Like if it's an angel group, or if it's an angel themselves, or if it's a VC, VCs have, here's the investments we make. You can go look at their portfolios, typically on their websites. Go look at the portfolios, see the kind of companies they invest in, understand their investment thesis. Most of them, again, publicize, this is our investment thesis, this is the stage, this is the industries, this is what we look for. Like, make sure it's aligned. What I feel as though a lot of founders continue to do in this age. And even as I said, when I was a founder coming up, this is what I did in the early going until I got mentored out of this practice. Target the right investors. Don't target an investor. Target only the right investors, and spend the time honing in and really identifying and narrowing the filters to get to the right investors, rather than going and having a lot of what I would just call non-productive investor meetings. Meaning, they might be a cordial meeting if you're able to get it, but if it's not going to land you the money you need and the capital you're seeking to grow the business, it's kind of a non-productive meeting. Not to say you can't learn something in it anyway, but if the ideal productive outcome of a meeting with an investor is a check, target the right investors. If you spend the time honing in on who are the right 10 investors to go talk to, you will have probably 10 much higher productive meetings than having any meeting with any investor who you think you can get in front of through whatever connections you're able to get. A lot of founders, I think, spend too much time meeting with investors broadly, but not focusing and honing in on who are the right investors for me to actually go meet with. And so I actually define investor categories just very simplistically in two categories. There's capital investors who seek ROI. They invest, they look for ROI. And there's strategic investors who are a lot less focused on ROI, but somehow see what you're doing as strategically aligned to what they're doing. I'd rather tell every founder, go find those strategic ones, and they're harder to find, but they're highly productive when you get to them.
Yeah, the idea of asking someone, and so do you agree that the heuristic, like the ability to pattern match, there is this shift from sort of like SaaS software to more deep tech happening right now? Like this is afoot at the moment a little bit, or?
A little bit, yeah. I do see a move with deep tech. Honestly, I still think a compelling SaaS solution is going to easily find the right people to support it. It doesn't have to be AI. I think everyone has to have a little bit of an AI story. What's your approach with AI? Because I think, AI is a very, we're in the hype of the hype circle, or the
Yes.
hype curve for AI. That said, I think you do have to address it. It's an elephant in the room if you're ignoring it and not even touching on what AI means to your business. And it can mean varying things across a wide spectrum of, it's not really going to impact us too. It's everything we're doing. But I do think, yeah, deep tech, I think there is a little bit of a reversion back to kind of tangible stuff a little bit. Deep tech, we see hardware. We work a lot with hardware founders, which is not always easy, right? I always joke the word hard is in it. How much more of a clue do we need to give you? But we do work a lot with hardware founders, and I do think there's more inclination towards some of that stuff now. Deep tech, but AI is still hot, obviously, for all the reasons you would understand. And I do think a good SaaS model, like I'm in the process of coming up, launching with a colleague, another, it's an app, it's a SaaS app for a particular use case. And we think it's going to find a very good resonance. We'll find out if we're right. But I'm not concerned that it's not specifically AI, it's not deep tech, it's not a hardware thing, it's just an app, but we think it has a good use case, and hopefully it will prove to be as compelling as we envision it being when we launch in a few weeks.
Yeah, there are still hundreds, if not thousands, of user experience things on digital that are social or enabled on digital that don't really have that haven't been invented in an artful way. It's got nothing to do with it's probably got more to do with sociology, human psychology, and creativity than understanding quantum computing or something.
Yeah. The good news is, as everything evolves and it continues evolving, it opens up new opportunities, right? Like now we can leverage AI in ways a year ago we wouldn't have. And 3 years ago, you were still theoretically discussing AI for the most part. Now we're really using AI, deploying AI. And by the way, we've probably seen the tip of the iceberg of AI. You know what I mean? Like it's just going to get better. We're starting to see a little bit more with robotics, and the combination of robotics and AI is bringing a sentience and an intelligence to a physical thing, in many cases, a humanoid type, thing. If you think of it in that, form factor. Of course, there's robots doing lots of stuff on manufacturing lines and whatnot, or in semiconductor facilities, fab facilities. But we're starting to see the blending of these things. And I love that with each new innovation, new emergence of something like AI or robotics, just creates a ton more opportunities. And, you know, I'm not the most creative guy in the world, but I get to work with a lot of really creative people coming up with things I couldn't even have imagined. And, you know, I'm working with one company, for example. It's three younger founders, younger than me. That's not hard anymore. But they've come up with a solution to help remove orbital debris from space so that it doesn't interfere with critical satellite communications. Oh my God, like you're pulling up next to a piece of junk orbiting in space at how many thousands of miles an hour it might be, you know, moving, and you're being able to take that out of orbit. And then the ideal thing they're trying to find is there a way to repurpose what that is in space so we don't have to bring it back down to Earth and then think we need to get something back up to space. Is there something reusable in this piece of debris, whatever it might be, that we can repurpose while we're here in space already? Like, for people to think in that way, it astounds me. I could never have thought of that idea, but I've been able to help this group, this team, move their business forward, because I'm a bit like more of a Sherpa. I'm not on your journey, but I know how to help you navigate the journey a little smoother. That's my hope that I can offer and bring to founders. But the creativity of what's going on with founders, like coming up with ideas like that, and again with AI and robotics and space and all this stuff, it's just astounding. And we also recently worked with an amazing group of founders on the front line in Ukraine, and it was all military and defense tech. A lot of it related to drone technologies. And there's just astounding creativity and innovation that comes about. And for us to work with founders that bring those ideas to us, and for us to be able to be surrounded by that kind of creativity, I just love what we do, my team and I do, working with these founders. Again, we're not the most creative people in the world, but we get to work with a lot of the most creative people.
There's some real echoes of the past with what's happening in conflicts in the world, I think, and how 100 years ago, new technology was being, you know, rapidly iterated. Yeah. And what's it's eye-watering, a little concerning, I'll be honest.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It makes you think a lot, but you realize, you know, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, right? Like these folks are dealing with existential issues and trying to use creativity and innovation to preserve their existence. I mean, in that particular example, using the Ukraine-Russia war example. But yeah, it's astounding. I love living in the era I'm in. I can't wait for the next 10 years to see what AI and robotics and whatnot bring, because it amazes me what it's brought already. And I know we're barely touching as I said, the tip of the iceberg.
I love the space I'm in. I love learning about things like, you know, everything from stable coins to AI to vibe coding to being able to like get in touch with anyone that you basically want to, if you have enough of a compelling reason to get in touch with them. So
exactly.
One last question. Really appreciate your time. Attention's getting more challenging. So the first thing we talked about was establishing a relationship. The second one was about coming up with a shared understanding, getting people excited, locked in with you. The third question here is really about trying to get attention, trying to stay in touch with your relationships, distracted focus, you know, short-term memory, all these other sort of things that are very emergent in our era right now. So how do you stay in touch with the people you want to stay in touch with, or even just would like to stay in touch with them?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we are living in a bit of an attention economy, right? Everybody's attention is just very distracted. There's too many things to pay attention to. So how do you stay front of mind, or at least in the orbit, so to say, of people? I often will just drop an email to people I'm thinking about, say, hey, just thinking about you, want to say hello, hope all is well, let's catch up soon. Like, that would be a full email from me to a lot of people that, you know, that I might think about these founders at one point, or something will, you know, trigger them crossing my mind, and I'll say, no, let me drop a quick note. So I try to do that. Also, I kind of ingest a lot of reading online. So I'm always reading different, you know, things online, blogs, whatever, Medium, articles, what have you, whatever it might be, all sorts of sources. And I would say in 6 or 7 out of 10 things I read, there's always someone that pops into my head, and I'll shoot it to them and say, hey, you know, I just came across this article I thought would be of interest. And it's more just staying connected than any real intention. I don't have a particular objective when I send it, other than to say, yeah, you know what, I was reading this, you crossed my mind, let's catch up. And so I do kind of keep, and because I work with so many people, it's really easy when I'm reading something for it to trigger someone in my head, because I work with, thousands and hundreds and ultimately over years, thousands of founders, and it often will trigger somebody. And I'll just say, hey, I was just thinking about you. Excuse me, I read the attached. I made me think of you. I hope everything is great. Let's grab a time to catch up briefly. And I'll do that very, very regularly to keep it in people's minds.
So that's great to hear. My mind, I hope you don't take this wrong, but I'm thinking about the TikToks my mom sends me. She's like, oh, this is very just a very nice little peck. It's like kind of a nice peck.
Yeah.
Thinking about you, read this article, could be helpful, or okay, I just met this person. Let me know. Like that's really so.
Those
that's
two. Those are there as well.
What about
it is different than the jokes and stuff my mom or others would send me. So mine almost will always, and people who know me know I'm very business oriented. I like to think I have other interests, but I am very business focused. So almost any outreach for me is going to have some businessy touch point to it, because that's just stuff that I enjoy. I mean, I have a real passion about it. So it's not normally a joke thing, although on occasions, if something hits me really funny, I'll send it out to some folks. But usually it's a businessy connection.
My mom it'll be like a stock tip or something. Yeah. So it is professional development. But
fair enough.
But for you, so you talked about how you maintain your network, communicate with your network. Within your accelerator and your business, who do you have under you, and how do you coach them about doing the things that need to be done to build the accelerator, probably manage the investments. So who's underneath you? What are they doing?
Yeah, we have a good team. We don't use hierarchical discussions or layers that way. So it's a team. We're all in it together. We all have a role and responsibility. But yeah, we have folks that are kind of social media communications folks that are constantly putting out information about our cohort companies and spreading the word, if you will, about them, their participation in our programs, always with permission. We make sure the founders are interested in us doing that kind of communication. And there's someone in our team that's their function is really market us as an organization and all of our cohort companies to help them get a little visibility. We have others that are more operational, through an application type process. They kind of ferret all of us through that and make sure we're all doing the right things, keep us on track. We're not always on track. We too get distracted, a lot from some of our day-to-day responsibilities. So we do have people with each of their kind of dedicated responsibilities, and part of their responsibilities is making sure everyone else is focusing on their part of their responsibility. Are you familiar with the term RACI matrix, or ACI? So
I've never quite figured out how to make it. I use it usually at like a product launch, or if I'm creating a PRD or something, but
we use it in our organization. So if it's a question around this is who's going to be the person you would go to, or this is the person who's responsible for that. So we do kind of adopt a RACI kind of construct in our organization to make sure everyone knows who is responsible and who do they turn to if there's a question about, whatever the topic may be. They know where to go. We try to create that clarity. Similarly with our mentors, we do a lot of communication. We use Slack channels, we use WhatsApp groups. We try to keep a very easy flow, and we try to tell people we're going to try to communicate with you in whatever way you're comfortable with. We're not asking people to change behaviors, change tools. So we take in a lot of the tools that people are already using and we adopt them. Rather than asking others to adopt our approach of communication, we adopt a lot of the communication approaches that others in our team use so that we can kind of hit people where they are. Some people like getting emails, some people like WhatsApp, some people like Slack groups, some people prefer Signal or Telegram or whatever their preferred channel is. So we try to adopt as many of those as possible and use them broadly so that we hit everybody in our teams where it's meeting them where they are, if that makes sense.
I'm super grateful for this chat. Learned a lot about some of the, let's say the lizard brain type of connection points around venture building, running really large organization, making a big impact with, you said 3,700 startups that have gone through.
To date, and climbing.
That's fantastic. Really grateful for the chat, Jeff. Let me know if there's any final thing, or I'll be in touch.
This is great, Quinn. And I welcome anyone who might be listening. If they're interested to learn about us, you can go to either SiliconValleyInYourPocket.com or the Batchery like a batch of cookies, Batchery.com. Those are the two programs we run, and just always love meeting new people. Having these kinds of conversations is really great and healthy for us too. So thank you for including me in the program, and excited to see where we go from here.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Have a good one.
You too.